All right, here we are. It is November 22nd. Thanksgiving is coming up, and we have a great guest. Today's a relaxed day. We're gonna talk about a bunch of things, but as you all know, we like to focus on digital transformations, and we just see if Llewellyn comes back, and he may be having. There he goes. He's having computer challenges, but he'll get there. Johnny, you have that guitar nearby?
Yes, I do. Only for you.
Let's get some mood going here for the Thanksgiving holidays.
Sometimes when the night calls it a day, and I wake up down in this missing you kind of way, I remember things better left forgotten. And sometimes when I'm holding someone new, I can't help myself. Wake up and think of you, and I remember things better left forgotten. Why, oh, why can't my mind let go of a love that used to be?
All right, thank you, Johnny. It's a beautiful day in Austin, Texas. It's 62 degrees and feels like football weather. What say you, John Butler?
It's a great day. We had an old pro came back at one of my golf clubs, Great Hills, and they teed off at 12 o'clock. And I said, no, I got to go see Llewellyn King, so I need to skip this great game that we're going to have. But
Of course.
the country itself is very, very interesting, and when you look at what we look at, then the technologies are just booming off the shelf to help everything from the grid to people who work at home to all of the smart city stuff. I think that's very, very interesting. But the world, the continent is a mess. It's a mess at the border of Texas. It's a mess in the Middle East, and of course, involving the Israelis, that war over there. But through all the mess, as I said before, the economy seemed to be doing pretty good. And it's a mess on the political scene, and that's all of the elections are coming up. And I had lunch with the guy who wants to run for one of the seats down in the valley. I had lunch with him, and it is really, really good. But when you look at our indications of happiness, right, of well-being, the airlines are full. There will be over 2.5 million people flying, I read. And that's even with all of the delays in the Northeast with the snow and all of that stuff. People are visiting family. And I've been concentrating, Andreas, on what I call the non-assimilated Americans. If we look at how we think about the world, we look at people coming here for opportunities and assimilation and become Americans. I think what the war in Israel has taught me is that we have some unassimilated Americans that are not in concert with American policy across the ocean, and I find that very, very interesting from a business point of view, because a lot of our great business people are from that part of the world in terms of the CEOs and who we fund, whether Silicon Valley and Austin, Texas, and those kind of things. So I've been really, for the first time, concentrating and looking, not for the first time, but more recently, looking at the demographics of America, what that means for the future, what it means for the military, what it means how we do policy in America. But if Llewellyn King comes here from Africa as he did, I want him to be an American when it comes to American policy. There's nothing wrong with giving your viewpoint. But I think that we fought World War I with immigrants from Italy. We fought World War II with German Americans who realized it was, American policy was to defeat Germany at that time, and they gladly went to defeat Germany. We fought part of World War II against Japan, but one of the first great Japanese units, in the country that fought against Japan. So I'm looking at some historical stuff that's interesting from the border and what that means in the future, who's coming into America. And then, of course, we have the political campaign. And the big wild card is what will happen to ex-President Trump. Will he be in jail when he wins the nomination from the Republican Party? I think that he will. And then we look at the age factor of both Trump and Biden. We need young people to step up and run for office. I guess when I was in 10th grade, the President Kennedy said the baton has been passed to a new generation of Americans. Well, I think we need that to happen again. And then I've been working hard with CMG Consulting. So that's about it with me. But it's pretty interesting when your mind is really, really wondering. And then, of course, one other thing, my Tigers have got to win. We got to beat A&M, and we hope that they do that. And my Longhorns, is going to be in the playoffs because we're going to beat Texas Tech. So, and Northwestern, my other PhD alma mater, they beat Purdue. So I'm feeling good, but this year when football and turkey collides, then you have to pull for your alma mater. So we have A&M, always a great team, great tradition. I miss a game. I hate missing the Aggie bands, one of my best traditions. So that's kind of where I am. I saw somebody did like this. Don, I'm sure
I think it'll be close. It'll be close. It'll be close. We're going to cover the spread. We're going to cover the spread.
Okay. We can't hear you.
Oh, I don't know if you handed it over.
Andreas, you're muted.
I wasn't going to go too far. I was just going to say we're
No,
going to cover the
no,
spread.
my bad. Let me go to Llewellyn King before I go to you, Don. And how are you, Llewellyn?
Well, absolutely fascinated by what Johnny Sibley Butler has to say. I'm also fascinated by CMG, where its principal employees used to play golf or attend football matches all day. I wonder how he gets his work done. It's very intriguing. There must be a new, an entirely new way of working.
Technology.
I'm also, it's something to do with as you're swinging at the ball, you're satisfying a client.
We have AI.
Yeah, you have AI in the accounts department too. Then of course he goes on about assimilation. This is a very interesting subject. I might mention that when I came to the United States, it was largely for people like you, Johnny, in a missionary capacity, to try to bring some enlightenment to you, to get you off the football field and back into work, but it clearly hasn't succeeded. The assimilation is absolutely key to any integration of immigrant populations into a native population to achieve a good effect. We have a very difficult situation when you don't get assimilation. And we think only in terms of nationality, but religion is also very important. The least assimilating people in Europe, and for that matter in the US, are probably the Muslim minorities. In England, you have a totally separate Muslim world with its own facilities, its own schools, and similarly, and even more in a more pronounced way on the continent of Europe. The whole idea, which has now become a Republican concept in America, but actually came from a French writer called Camus, but not the famous Camus, the less famous Camus, who one day lived in rural France sometime in the 1990s, and he looked around and he saw that the Muslim population was not French. They were not behaving like young Frenchmen, new Frenchmen. They were behaving as they had in their indigenous countries and practicing the separating thing, their religion, and he called them a replacement population. And that has become an extraordinarily loaded and dangerous expression. He didn't see it as a conspiracy. He saw it simply as something that was happening. And I can tell you that as I walked with Linda, we walked through downtown Brussels, which we know pretty well, and you don't go in the Muslim areas. They're very unwelcoming. Likewise, you've got Muslim areas in cities in England like Bradford, and they are not assimilating. On the other hand, in Britain, which is really in some ways now a great place to study this, the Indian community, largely Hindi, has assimilated, so much so that the Prime Minister is of Indian descent. Via Africa, Johnny, via Africa, but nonetheless an 100% Indian, and nobody raises that issue because it's taken for granted. If you get assimilation, people accept it. If you get difference and people demanding rights and being different at the same time, you get social tension and eventually political problems because people vote with their tribe. And that is not a very good thing. In the US, most of the immigrants have assimilated. And we've been very fortunate in that. Now, there are little pockets where we don't get assimilation. I employed at King Publishing back in the day an art director who was Korean, a very talented young man, and totally assimilated. But his mother lived in a suburb of Washington, spoke no English, and had no need to speak English. She lived in a totally unassimilated Korean enclave. That is not good. So when you're thinking about assimilation, think, how do you get people to do it? And how do you get them to abandon? One of the things, and Johnny, you mentioned technology. One of the things that has enabled these communities not to assimilate has been technology, because you can watch Korean television in Arlington, Virginia. You can live a totally different life. You can think that you are living in Korea or Pakistan, or in my case, say, in Zimbabwe, without really recognizing that you have left that world behind. And that's a very strange thing. When you can pick up a cell phone and without cost talk to the land from which you came, you haven't really left it. Used to be that immigrants came to this country a one-way journey, quick to forget where they had come from and quickly to become a part of what they had come to. That may not be so true now, and you may want to dwell on those things, Johnny, between swings and swigs at the beer park. Oh, I beg your pardon, the ballpark.
You know, what I like, you know, it's the same thing with the military. So when I was in Vietnam, I was completely shut off, right? I was a combat soldier in Vietnam, completely shut off. But now the soldiers have cell phones. They see their relatives on Zoom, and you never really leave America. And I think that's certainly true when it comes to the idea. And what does that have for business enterprise? What does it mean for business enterprise? But more importantly, what does it mean for the safety of America going forward and the disruptions in America? And this is different, say, from the social disruptions of the 1960s or the women's disruption in the 1920s or the women's disruption now.
I think our chairman will want to bring our guest in now, but we
that's right.
To this subject.
Well, he's an Aggie, and he's made it clear.
He's
an Aggie, he's made that clear. So
you guys never cease to amaze me that you like to talk politics more than anybody that I know. I would like.
You must live in a very strange place. Is it called Austin, Texas? Another enclave that is not integrated into America.
So let me bring in our guest, Don Cardinal. Don, say hello to the guys and tell us your current role and what keeps you up at night.
Sure. Hey, hi, everyone. I'm Don Cardinal, Managing Director of Financial Data Exchange. We are the standard setting body for the US and Canada for what we call open banking or open finance. If those of you have been following politics will see that the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau just last month put out a notice of proposed rulemaking that mentioned a common standard in addition, yesterday, the Department of Finance in Canada also put out a open banking missive that talked about a common technical standard. Hint, hint, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, that's us. So we hope to be recognized officially in the coming months, should we earn that. I appreciate that, but Andres asked me to come along here and talk about how open finance helps feed smart grids, because at the end of the day, that smart grids and smart infrastructure have to be paid for. And the only way you do that is with financial data, solving a business case, and having real-time authoritative data from a system of record like a bank or a brokerage or a underwriter is really fundamental. So that's kind of how Andres found me in the world and brought me over here.
Yeah, and absolutely, and we want to get into that. I do want to say really quickly a couple of tidbits about what's going on. We track smart cities, smart utilities, smart buildings for our audience and stuff. And I do want to say that on the automation side, things are taking a bit of a setback. The CEO of Cruise just resigned. Cruise is a GM company that is probably the leading company in automation for vehicles, and those vehicles have been having a lot of trouble. In fact, I happened to witness an interesting episode downtown Austin when one of my friends late at night threw himself in front of the couple of Cruise vehicles, and they freaked out, didn't know what to do. They paralyzed, they were shaking. It was really frightening to see that those vehicles are really not ready for prime time, and they have been having a lot of accidents lately. And so Cruise has suspended their riding across the nation, and I think some of the other companies are following suit. Interestingly enough, also tidbit for the audience, right? Those vehicles are riding at about 25 miles an hour, and they consume 4 kilowatt hours, 4 kilowatts per hour of energy to do what they need to do. It's still a very nascent, interesting challenge for those things to come along. And I would be remiss if I didn't tell you that we just signed as Texas State for the Cedar group that I drive there on research, a partnership with TxDOT, and we have a contract for 2 years on digital innovation that we'll have to deal with a lot of that stuff, and also with we signed with the aviation division another contract related to advanced air mobility that has to do with the vertical version of all that. And so lots of stuff going on there. I find it very interesting. The other thing to share is that there's a big issue going on with office real estate, and there's a big transition going on with smart living and transforming those office buildings into residential buildings. Quite a new innovation going on about toilets that are not connected to waterways, and because that's one of the biggest issues with that transformation, where how do you put toilets everywhere without having the plumbing? So lots of interesting things going on. And the last thing I wanted to share real quick before we get into what Don does is we have a new president in Argentina, who is a guy that professes that he's going to get rid of the central bank in Argentina, and he's going to dollarize the economy, and it's all about wanting to become a superpower, a capitalist. Very interesting times of what's going on there. So Don, I'm curious, couple things that maybe you could comment on, maybe
Sure.
you don't want to comment on. Cryptocurrency, the infamous, Sam Altman challenges the guy who, FTX, whatever it was. Where is crypto happening? There's a big talk about the central bank of the U.S. providing, centralized digital currency. What do you think is going to happen here? I mean, are we too early stage to tell how this transitions? You guys are shooting for open standards, open platforms. Where is this heading?
Sure. Preamble, my counsel tells me, hey, these are my opinions, not those of my organization. Let's talk about it in different things. First of all, when you talk about cryptocurrency, the idea of digital currency has been around for a long time. We've been sending digital transactions for decades.
Mm-hmm.
So what you're really talking about is anonymity. And anonymity is great when you're a bad guy. It's also great for civil liberties. And how do you do that? Now, cash in the physical world has always been somewhat limited, you're localized to just arm's length. In the digital space, though, you can have planet-wide, which is why every time you have ransomware, they want to get paid in digital currency. And so the AML piece of it, terrorism financing piece, is always counterposed to privacy and that sort of thing. So you've got that balance, and no one has figured out that right balance for that with respect to crypto. So right now, crypto is effectively the only real use I've seen so far is just been speculation for hoping to be the next Bitcoin billionaire or whatever currency you du jour. Now, that's not talking about digital assets. Digital assets is another nuanced version of that, where you've taken a physical asset and you've created a digital token or set of tokens, effectively like shares, pieces of it. You can own part of a Monet and that kind of thing. Banks will hold that for you. Why? Banks have been stores of value for millennia and will continue to do so. So you set that problem aside. Now we get back to central bank digital currency. The Federal Reserve and other central banks are looking at it. The question is, why? I think it's a solution in search of a problem, simply for the fact that we already have a digital currency. Thank you very much. Two, we have somewhat privacy under the Bank Secrecy Act and other privacy laws. If I am buying diabetes medicine with my debit card of my bank, nobody gets to know that. If you put all those transactions back at a government-sponsored entity, I know the Fed is technically owned by the member banks, but you now have a central bank digital currency seeing that, you have one spot to really watch everything. And as a young CPA, one of the things people talked about, the things that were important in life. When you look at the checkbook, it told a very different story. Where people spend their money is absolutely where they think it's important. And so can you imagine a central repo, central repository, actually knowing with certainty all this information to a very personal and granular level about all of us? For privacy reasons and redundancy reasons, I just don't see the point of a central bank digital currency. I've yet to find the problem that it solves.
Yeah, that's a good point. Johnny, what do you think?
Well, I find it interesting, Don, and I was waiting my venture background and understand and when you get to what you're doing, isn't it amazing how what we call underwriting, or the loan and insurance company, has evolved from financial data to all kinds of data. That is what I see. I was a consultant with State Farm, the greatest company in the world, for 18, 19, 20 years. And what I see is this: when I look at what you're doing, right, as the manager for financial data, it's not so much the form or the content of the data, it's what we know about people as we underwrite them, right? So I'm reminded of I'm going to take you back to some historical stuff. 1830 guy by name was Auguste Comte, who was interested in a discipline called social physics. And he laid out all of this in the 1830s, right? Can you imagine, he said, having and writing equations about what people do and their future, right? Had a big argument, and this social physics turned into sociology and statistics rather than social physics. But now, right now, we have the opportunity to do great social physics. So my question to you is this: if you look at what we used to do underwriting with, right? Let's say you're financing a grid, right? Or whatever have you. And we had probably 16 variables to do underwriting. Just like when you buy a house, you had maybe financial variables, right? But now you have all other kinds of variables. You have where I go to lunch. You have how often I go to the hospital. You have all of this data. How do you combine what I call the social physics with the financial data that physicists have done so well, have taken that over, and write the equations to say that it's okay for Austin, Texas to get a $10 billion loan for you on a grid? How do you write those equations?
Well, let's go ahead and split the two out. When I'm looking at the transactional data and spending habits and planning and variabilities of an organization, whether it be municipality or a business, I think it's one deal, because I'm not looking at any one person's, leaving sole proprietors as a side. That's one thing. And so I'm much more comfortable looking at the average spend, proclivity to have free cash flow. Getting back to the 5 C's of credit, right? Conditions, capacity, collateral, character, that sort of stuff. And so that's good old fashioned underwriting. The extent that I can have new and better data streams that are actually forward looking, A lot of times we have their financials, which are backward looking, which is great, but past results are not an indicator of future performance. But if I can look at trends in cash flow, free cash flow, and your ability to complete that, 360 payment marathon that I want you to do for your municipality, I think that's really important. So on the privacy side of things, yeah, it is a bit spooky on the individual side. And I think customers need to be more empowered and educated on what they're sharing, the ramifications of that. And to pull another quote, early 1900s, Isaac Asimov wrote a series called Foundation, where he was able to use these tools to actually project where society is going. And in the book, in the series, freakishly accurate historical projections well into the future.
You're exactly right, because on the social side, we said we've got to look back to go forward, And if you take the census data, for example, the relationship between education and income has remained constant for years. Now we're getting all the other kind of data involved. So my question to you is this: if you look at the different kinds of financial data that you model, right? So as a consumer, I want, it's in God we trust, the dollar, and the dollar really has no backing, but the backing is the United States government, and it can print money, right? Crypto, it has no backing. The government is not going to print crypto, right? And right now, I talk to people all the time. I have a person who has an enterprise. He does a lot of his business just on crypto, and people change it. So Andreas has asked about that in the at the beginning. Well, let's say that we have a metric of financial data. Okay, and that metric includes crypto, that metric includes dollar bills, that metric includes gold that you can purchase. And unlike banks, banks really create money when they, when I put $2 million in the bank, then the bank go out and create money by investing that money. So what are the metrics? What would that metric be? Let's say a dependent variable, if you will, to get academic. What kind of, is it dollars? Is it crypto? Is it a combination of two? How do you create that variable for, hey, this is financial data?
Well, when you look at someone's assets and holdings, assets and liabilities, an asset could be artwork they've pledged as collateral. It could be farmland. It could be livestock. So with respect to any asset, I think crypto, and it's a very liquid, probably one of the most liquid assets, more so than dollars, depending on how you measure it and how you can transact. So you've got this very liquid asset, pardon the dogs, that you would then take into any collateral decision. Or any sort of liability play. So to that extent, it's not really that different. I wish I had something big and sexy to tell you, but honestly, in the financial space, it's just one more asset you could pledge, like stocks or anything else.
Yeah. Llewellyn? Come closer.
What do you see as the future of cryptocurrencies? There seem to be several. Will they one day be backed by real assets? Will we actually know the value of them? Or are they always going to be a speculative bubble? And do they really have a future?
The answer is all of the above, and I'm not trying to hedge, but let's talk about stablecoins, where it is a digital currency backed by a basket of either other currencies or other assets. And I can't remember the coin itself, but it's a coin actually backed by gold holdings. So it is a fractional ownership of gold. So now you have a tangible physical asset with a real market value assigned to it as well. So you have that sort of asset backed, whether it be by a currency basket or by tangible goods. And I think there's always a use for it. As a useful proxy, I think it's really interesting. For example, if I'm a car rental place, I can now have digital assets representing my vehicles without swapping titles. And keep track of that in a distributed ledger, which is a big copy of spreadsheets everywhere else. It's not that fancy, but I think there's opportunities there. And there'll always be, unfortunately, some people who want a lot of privacy and who will then have digital currency, both for good purposes, so libertarian type deals, and nefarious means. And bad guys have loved cash for years. Digital currency, anonymous digital currency is very popular with them too. Let's be fair. And then you have this swath in between. What else does it solve? I think the ability to replicate what's being done with negotiable instruments, and I think in some ways it's going to help trade finance, but in very limited circumstances. And so you have this continuum of uses from specifically tied asset-backed items all the way to where nothing's backing it, but just best of luck. I hope the algorithm holds, and everything in between. And I think every spot on that continuum has a use case, some good, some bad.
Let's talk
The
about.
thing,
Let's talk,
the thing, sorry.
go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah,
Uh,
we're not
uh,
ready to leave this one on. I got
Sorry,
one more
I'm a little naive about financial instruments, but it seems to me that most currencies have durability. They're only really eroded by inflation. When we get to a digital currency, it has no durability. You don't know its value day to day. And I just wonder how that can last. And you mentioned gold. Where does gold fit into all this? There are still people running around talking about the gold standard, which seems to me rather a strange thing to be doing in this day and age. Where does gold fit into this? It's still an important player in financial dealings and in the hoarding of money. We hoard money in gold.
Well, there's a lot to unpack there, but let's just take about two topics. We talked about asset-backed digital currencies. And so, yes, so this digital coin represents 1/1000th of a troy ounce, or whatever the metric is. And that it does indeed is a useful proxy, as long as you have faith that their holdings are indeed there and they are indeed tied faithfully to it. You know the number of coins in the ledger. That's that. It's no different than owning shares in a company. As long as you believe that it really is a finite number of shares and tied exactly to that company, then that's that. With respect to the gold bugs, and you see people who will make that case time and time again, the idea being is it puts some sort of brake on politicians' ability to print more money and try to print your way out of debt. It's like, okay, I owe $30 trillion. I can just inflate my way out of it by making the debt I owe virtually worthless. Whereas if you were tied to gold, now you have a physical brake on the amount of currency in play, and it keeps M1 through M3 somewhat contained. And if you keep the money supply contained, it's very difficult on the supply and demand side to keep, inflating the money supply and then pushing inflationary pressures. But that's the extent of my economics from 32 years ago.
Let me
Go
get
ahead, Jim.
my colleagues real fast here, Andreas. I'm going to give an assignment to my distinguished friends to read a book by a great South African, Emmanuel Dearman, Models Behaving Badly. And I'm just going to summarize right here why we will always have financial crisis. All of the models that we have are based on physics, but 3 physics models are dead center, and they always work. So what we've done at the University of Chicago, Llewellyn, is take the physics model and apply them to finance. The problem is finance people will change their minds. And so it's very, very important, as you learn in any, social psychology course, is that the models that we're having cannot really sustain the expectations because this is not physics. So we will always have financial crisis, but there's nothing else that we have, right, Don? We don't have anything else. So the algorithms that we use are based on physics, but that's the only thing that we have. And by the way, finance has performed extremely well in the last 100 years. It allows us to have insurance, it allows us to buy on time, and et cetera, et cetera. But Llewellyn, that's all that we had. You're right. Even if there's no backing, it's a psychological component to it. Thank you. You like that, Don?
So let me change the gears a little bit and see if Don can help us with a bunch of things that I have in my head. So it's been going on for a while that a long while, 15 years or so, since I started talking about the smart grid in Austin in 2004, that someday we will have an open exchange of energy, and maybe the commodity will be decoupled from the delivery system, and things like virtual power plants and transactive energy will take place, and all kinds of technologies needed to make that happen. But the financial markets have always driven sort of the transformation of society around how we deal with goods and commodities and the value of things. So I'm curious what Don thinks about the future of transactive energy, which is illegal on the monopolies that control the sale of the kilowatt hours, because not everybody can sell to everybody on the retail spectrum yet. A lot of changes will need to happen in policy, but the technology is there. Don, what do you think? How does this come about? Is it about the benefits to the consumers as a whole? Is it a political thing? I mean, how does it become a reality? Because I think it's almost there.
Well, I think anytime you have a new technology or transformative technology, you have to have enough benefit to overcome the inertia of the old paradigm. Remember, the world has performed very well, and a lot of people are used to the world where this didn't exist. And so just informing them of the benefits, I think, are important. Fear of the unknown is also another piece of it. And we just saw, ERCOT had problems in the winter storm 2 years ago. I think we need to be careful with, okay, how do we answer those worst case scenarios? How can we make sure that there are guardrails? Because unfettered capitalism is a wonderful allocator of resources, but it is also an incredibly cruel mistress. And those aren't my quotes. That's out of, I believe it's Milton Friedman, but out of University of Chicago finance. I had to go back there. So you saw, for example, during the ERCOT, the winter storm, the Snowmageddon 2 years ago, you saw the spot rate for power delivery. I mean, it's unbelievable, and there was no customer backstop for that per se. So I think we need to be able to answer those safeguards, because efficient markets work well when economists only work well when all the players have equal information and then equal power to act on that information. It's the second part as well. And consumers, by their very nature, aren't experts in the grid. They can't make real-time risk assessments, nor do they have the tools to do so. So you need to have some sort of market mechanisms, whether it be government or regulatory or somehow, to help even that playing field. And so I'm almost like assisted capitalism. I hate to say that, I'm a free market guy, but you've got to help the amateurs.
Right. No, that makes a ton of sense. So when you think back to the web, e-commerce, Amazon, everybody buys on Amazon, things get delivered. But 20 years ago, nobody wanted to use their credit card to buy things. The laws were there, the infrastructure was there. It took maybe 10, 15 years for it to take place. Are we in a similar journey here? I mean, the technology is almost there. People are going to want to sell energy from their F-150 back to the grid. Are we talking that this is going to take 20 years kind of thing?
Well, you remember one of the things that helped e-commerce was a thing called Regulation E. And that is, if you're defrauded during e-commerce and you let your institution know with a certain amount of time, and you can, in fact, if it wasn't blatantly obvious it was you doing the defraud, the bank had to make you whole. And so you basically, you are protected in a lot of ways. And so even the industry, and I'm on a fraud working group with the Federal Reserve, the industry tolerates a certain amount of criminality because there's so much more positive commerce happening on. It's like when you loan, if I don't have any losses or charge-offs from my loan portfolio, I haven't made enough loans, because you've got to be in that gray area as well to maximize the amount of lending you need to do. Similarly with e-commerce, there's a certain amount of e-commerce that has to happen, including you're going to see a certain amount of chargebacks and fraud, just because there's that gray area you need to expand to optimize your commerce. But Reg E and things like Check 21 made things like that possible. And again, talk about safeguards of the consumer. So you need to have safeguards like that present as well.
Got it.
Yeah, but let's go back to the safeguards. Let's go back to the grid. One thing that Milton Friedman, I mean, actually, as a grid user, I don't have much choice, right? It's free, in equilibrium theory, when everybody has, the same amount of information, and you assume perfect markets, and then of course you write equations, which again are based on physics. But one of the interesting things about the grid, and the reason why they don't have to change to really, really satisfy me, because as long as my lights come on, I'm fine, right? I really don't have a choice. I don't have a choice except to depend upon the electric grid. And that brings me to the Butler question. Don, why are we still running on 1919 technology that my father put in rural Louisiana, as a county agent? So he loved A&M, by the way, as a county agent, as an ag agent, and electrifying, electrification of the rural, because I don't have a choice. I don't have a choice to go to another electric company. I'm just kind of stuck.
That has to do, I think a lot of it is the decoupling of the delivery mechanism, the delivery franchise, the infrastructure franchise, and the actual service providing and generation piece of it. Now, the infrastructure oftentimes is a local co-op or a local township or local city, and it's worked that way for a number of years, to your point. But they also have a lot of this technical debt built in there. And if it works, and put your municipality hat on, if you're City of Austin, go, well, the lights come on. And yes, it's old technology, but as long as we can survive the next bad winter storm or the next bad thunderstorm, is it worth me spending $10 million on modernizing this section of my grid? Or would I rather politically have to spend that $10 million somewhere else? And it's just a matter of prioritization. And as long as it's not a priority, it's not a priority. And so it'll always be number 10 on the list or number 40 on the list, as long as the lights are on and you can get through a thunderstorm within a day or so and get lights back on. Now, when it starts to be an issue like it was 2 years ago, then people start going, hey, why aren't we burying more of these power lines? Hey, why don't we have smart switching? Hey, why don't we? And that's really when you capture it. But it's a psychopolitical issue versus the good old inertia of, hey, it's paid for.
So who
I
are
wish I
your,
had a better answer.
John, who are your major customers now? When you the major customers that call you during crisis, as a 501c, who do you interact mostly with?
Sure. As a standards body, again, just like with USB doesn't make the cables. They just provide an antitrust safe space, a neutral space for the manufacturers to decide what these 4 wires and the conductor do. Similarly, we are just as data standards. So we have banks, we have aggregators, we have apps, we have service providers, consultants who all come and work on the standard. We all vote. Field 1 is date, and it's going to be 16 characters, or field 2 is Gregorian, not Julian. Field 3 is credit card numbers, and it's this many. Field 4 is this. And getting hundreds of organizations to simply agree on things as simple as that is really what we do. And that's a full-time job in and of itself.
If you standardize all the variables in the right
Yep.
in the right vectors, then I can buy the data and I don't have to recode it.
Correct.
And so you clean the data. So for example, if somebody would say, well, this portion, it should have 4 vectors in it, but it's got 6. So you look at that, throw it out and clean it up. So does that mean that you can sell data as clean data if I'm interested in studying the movement of the grid?
There are people who do that today. They are data aggregators. And so they'll connect to hundreds of banks and credit unions and be able to pull data in a unified format. And by having the standard it's about 5 years old, by having that standard, the more and more endpoints that have this standard, the cleaner it is, there's less variability. And if you look at what's my credit card balance, for example, for your corporation, you have a corporate card. Well, that screen that you're looking at is I have a promotional balance, I have a statement balance, I have my cash advance balance, all different numbers. Which one do you return? And that variation causes hiccups and causes bad decisions to get made.
Absolutely.
Innocently enough. But when we all agree on what these fields mean, it's across all 9,000 banks and credit unions in North America, then you can have very clean data and make very good decisions at very low cost.
It's like the old questionnaires where you give somebody a questionnaire, you get back 1 million of them, and they say, what is your education? And it's 1 to 2, just two things you can fill in, and you find 4 things fill in, then you know that you have a problem, right? So it goes back to the old verification, what we used to call cleaning data when we had cards in the old days. And you say that some people are selling this data. Is it for research? Is it for making decisions in the future? And etc.
Yeah, great question. So there's a whole business behind selling data from with customers' permission, mind you. So let's say I'm an app, I'm a payment app, and I want to, John wants to pay Llewellyn when LSU comes up short score wise, and you guys have made a bet, and you could settle that up in real time. Well, the only way that works is if the account data is being visible to both of you through that app, and you have permission. And those connections are done through companies. Typically, you have Plaid, Yodlee, Finicity, MX, and a couple others. Their business is to connect those accounts up and facilitate things for PayPal, for Cash App, for Venmo, for Zelle. And they help make that stuff fluid, and you can know the account's open and in good standing, that Llewellyn is indeed Llewellyn. And that's worth something. And so the PayPals of the world pay for that data.
Yeah, well, you are at the very, very center of decision making, period. I
Our
mean,
standard is, yes, sir.
your
We don't
standard
hold
is, so
data.
you
We don't
wanna-
hold data.
right. You want to standard out the data, and that is at the very, very center of things. Yes.
Yeah, data hygiene, as you said, John, you're exactly right. Data hygiene is important. Once you have that, you can make some very good decisions across large populations.
Right. Llewellyn, you're muted.
There we are. Sorry about that. Don, a simple question. Standards, and we all understand the importance of them in everything. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able. I remember the times when there was different American thread on a nut to British fine thread to standard thread, and we had to go to some sort. But the question is, when does standardization inhibit innovation? When does it become a drag on innovation? And is that something you're aware of or pay attention to?
It's always something to be aware of. And the government just recently in their pronouncement, looked to make sure that the standards were fair, open, and inclusive. Open standards only work if they are indeed open, if all comers are free to comment on them. Now, it may not carry the day, but as long as you have an open marketplace of ideas, it will continue to live. I'm going to give you a great example. And IBM back in the day in the 60s had a 90-something% share of big iron in data processing. And their data standard was called EBCDIC. And so when Big Blue laid down a data standard, that was it. ASCII came along in the 70s and kicked its butt. It's a free open standard. ASCII is still around. No one knows EBCDIC. They think I made that one up. Free open standards have always won, but you've got to make sure they're always free. You always got to make sure they're always open and available to all comers. And it's got to be, you can never be a monopoly. You can never have a monopoly. It has to always face market pressures and always fight to stay relevant.
Thank you. Very interesting.
So, Don, tell me real quick, when you think about the data itself, what are we using? Is it XBRL? What languages? Take us a little bit into the details of this data and the tools that we're using.
Sure. Around the world, open banking, open finance, they're typically the REST APIs. There's representational state transfer. Those the API architecture, and the objects themselves are just JSON objects. So you can port XML or XBRL to JSON very easily. Now there are other languages as well, but the world's kind of settled on that for now. There are some newer technologies like Snowflake and other things, but pretty much globally, where people are on the tech continuum, REST APIs, JSON objects, and then even within the objects themselves, you can tokenize that data, you can encrypt that data further, and of course, under the transmit mechanism, it's TLS 1.2 or higher. There's mutual TLS. So all up and down the OSI model, there's a variety of security measures put in place. But when it comes to the actual language, JSON is pretty much it right now.
Right.
Yeah, I think that when it comes to standardization, because I think that's what's important. Whether you're talking about standardization of airplane parts or standardization of automobile parts, that's what makes it go smooth. The reason why, when we sent people for quality to go to Japan, the reason why Japanese cars lasted so long, when I did my 60 Chevrolet, I had to go down and buy one part, buy the same part, and it was different on the metrics, right?
Yep.
So in that case, you were at the very, very center of the quality of the cleaning of the data. And when the data themselves are not clean, then it's going to rattle, right? And we have spent so many hours on standardizing airplane parts, and we know that the quality of decision making in all industry depend upon the deviation for the parts. So what you're talking about is the deviations of the data. So my question is, when you have all of those things in place, do you have any data on case? I know you do, on case studies and decision making based on your data.
Sure, we do. One of the neat things about having transactional data available is for what we call thin file or no file customers. So you have someone who's a recently divorced spouse, or they're a new immigrant trying to assimilate into the country, or who's just gotten out of the military. They've worked for a while, so they have a couple of years of transactions, but they've never bought anything. So their credit bureau doesn't even know they exist, or
Mhm.
they're thin file. And then trying to apply for, buy a car, anything else you would want credit for, get a job, get an apartment, very, very difficult. But now that we've made uniform transactional data available in real time, authoritatively, directly from the bank, well, now the lender, the lessor, the hirer can now make very good decisions based on it with the customer's permission, mind you, in real time and in a highly hygienic, low cost format, which in the past was virtually impossible to do because it was all disparate. I mean, talk about almost 10,000 banks and credit unions in America. That would have been impossible. Now you have one standard.
Mhm. I think it's very, very good, because when things are standardized across board, this is what we did with computers. And by the way, this, Don, is a problem with the grid. We have not standardized
Right.
everything on the grid so that we could share across America problems with the grid. So it seems to me that you have a great contribution to make to the standardization of the grid, and how the grid is so therefore it won't be different kinds of grid parts even, right?
Yep.
Wow, in different parts of America. So when the grid goes down in Texas, we got to go back to 1880 to find the part, right? When it goes down in California, we got to go back to 1946 because it's a newer grid. So I think that's very, very important.
I agree. And then when it comes to manufacturing parts, because I'm only manufacturing one type of transformer or one style or whatever, I can now do that at scale. Instead of having 3 product lines, I can have one. And that efficiency drives the cost down. So it is cheaper.
Yes, that's why Southwest Airlines is the greatest airline ever done. As a matter of fact, I used to Herb Keller would say, "How did you fly here?" I said, "I flew here on my private plane," but somebody wrote Southwest on the side of it, and I'm really mad. So I think so. I mean, when you do that, and Southwest flew on one kind of plane, therefore you had to train one kind of pilot. You had all kinds of sameness that's going on, whereas American Airlines might fly 7 different airplanes, and that's the same thing when it comes to standardization of the grid. I think it gets cheaper, and I think that it's your kind of data that will allow us to do that in the future.
Appreciate that.
And I'd like to ask Andres about the grid. Do you think the grid is wanting in standardization? I mean, we run on 60 cycles everywhere. There's an amazing amount of interconnection between the 3,000 utilities in the country. So I wonder how much that is impaired by a lack of standardization. Seems to me there is quite extraordinary standardization.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about data though, and we're talking about data fields and interaction of data in transactions in terms of how you. So the challenge that the utilities have to get there is utilities need to record the information and how they run their business and be totally transparent. So one of the problems that we have today, and this is, the telecom industry went through this to deregulation and the ability to decouple the physical delivery from the entity doing the transactions and managing the customer exchange. So only 16 states have competitive infrastructure, if you will, that is shared by others. The rest of the states don't have that. And within the states where you have infrastructure, you still have munis and co-ops that are monopolies, and the challenge of sort of unraveling all that to really unleash the value of the commodity and the value of the service is that today people don't think about paying for connecting to the grid as you pay for connecting to the internet. So, and that cost can be separated, but most utilities don't have that cost separated either. So what customers pay is to make customers pay today. So if you're in a competitive Texas market, Houston, Dallas, what have you, all that cost of the grid itself is kind of one bullet item that is buried into the additional fuel costs and the margin of a retail energy provider that is charging you for it, and they make their money and their margin that way. But there is a lot of there's a lot of unpacking that, in my opinion, still needs to happen for this to be super clean, so you can eventually have a, Chicago CME exchange on options for, electrons and puts and calls on PJM or what have you. And so we need more transparency of the tracking of the delivery of the commodity and the infrastructure and cost allocation.
Yeah, and that's also true with groceries. That's also true with parts. That's all true with everything that we do when we come to find out where they are. I was working with a company that traced the temperature of products as they move through the supply chain. And what a great piece of data that we had. And I think the most important thing, Don, is that we just didn't have that data in the past. The revolution in connectivity has provided not only for me, allowing me to talk on the cell phone to do this program, but every time I turn on my computer, there are bits of data that we can utilize to make decisions in the future. And I think it's very, very good that we can do that. Now, when something goes wrong with the computer, we have the data. Just like when the airplane crashes, we want to find the parts and go back and improve the future. I think we're doing the same thing with the grid and the movement of the data that we can share. If we can standardize all of the data, you're right, Llewellyn, it's about this. It's not about other stuff, it's about the standardization of the data. And that means in the old SPSS model, making sure that every data bit is punched on the right card. Yes, that's right. Mm-hmm.
Well played, John. Yeah, you had to go for an older reference than Mayeb one. Absolutely.
So Don, tell us real quick, what's in front of you the next 6 months? What's going on in your neck of the woods? Any conferences or any new things that you're planning to announce? Feel free to share anything with the audience.
Yeah, sure, certainly. Our spring summit will be March 12th through 15th in Washington, D.C., the DuPont Hilton. If you're interested in open finance and has anything to do with moving consumer and small business data, payroll data, tax data, that sort of deal, that'll be the one spot that'll be there. We've asked Director Chopra of the CFPB to come keynote for us. He's on the fence. We're hoping to get him. We're going to be announcing our fall metrics. We just announced our spring metrics. Our fall metrics were at 65 million consumers already benefiting from this technology. I'm cautiously optimistic we'll be at 75 million of the 110 million banked Americans. So that's 3/4 of the market already benefiting from this solution, which is a great thing. And the other thing is we're applying for recognition from the government to be official, to be vetted, if you will. So that'll keep us busy for the next 6 to 12 months.
Got it. Gentlemen, final thoughts?
Well, I just think that this is a great discussion here because we're talking about the movement of data. It's a great discussion because it will affect every industry that we have. For people who sit around the table, they used to say, give me 3 points of data now. And now, Llewellyn, you might walk into a grocery store and the computer might look at you and say, your credit is so bad, we don't want your business. Now, insurance companies have been doing that for years. And I think that the movement of data and the big issue, as we all know, is just a privatization. And like you said, you can use the means, you can use the standard deviations, you can use the averages, you can use the mode. But it comes to using my specific data, then I know that the FBI is after me or some other law enforcement agency. But the data are certainly out there. Llewellyn, we have face recognition data. Llewellyn, when you get on your train to go to New York City, they can pick up your face and compare it and pick up every place you've been in the world. So it's amazing.
So I travel very much. I see it operational at the airports. I would just like to say a personal thing, and that is whereas I think standardization is essential and wonderful, I do wonder to what extent we're homogenizing the world and taking some of the flavor and color out of it.
You do run the risk whenever you standardize items. If you're inflexible, then you don't make room for net new innovations, net new outliers that are indeed the wonder of things. You want to pivot to a metaphor for crops. We have these standardized crops, which are great for standardized yields, but you don't have any genetic variety. And when you lose that genetic variety, if you have a crop pest or something like that, you don't have any successor strains. And so I think you need to be open and try not to be, you have to be not be inflexible.
Very interesting, Don. Thank you very much, and forgive the
Thank you very much.
naivety of some of the questions.
Happy to do it.
Well said, Don. Well said. Looking forward. Wish you good on football. Have a great Thanksgiving. Thanks for being with us. We may need to check with you 6 months from now, see how the journey is going.
Appreciate it. Take us out, John.
Johnny, take us away.
Goodbye to Texas University. So long to the orange and white. And it's good luck to the dear old Texas Aggies. They are the ones who show the real
fight.
The
The eyes.
Texas
are
are
upon you. That is the song they sing so well.
Sounds like
Sounds
hell.
like hell.
Goodbye, Texas University.
We're gonna beat you all to jigger rum, Russ, Texas, varsity's horns, varsity's horns. Oh, see.
Good luck.
Thank you. You too. You
You
too.
like
Yeah, it was wonderful.
that? Thank you.
Thank you,
I've
guys.
been around for a long time.
That's been a while. See you guys.
Enjoyed it, Don.
All right.
Thank you much,
Thank you.
man.
All right.
Thanks, y'all.
Bye-bye.
Stay in touch. Bye-bye.